Ryer, it looks like, I hope I'm saying the name right, Reier in North Dakota. He or she writes, I love your show, listen every day on demand. They need to get you on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominating committee. There would be some interesting conversations, to say the least. Yeah, there would be, Ryer. I hope that might happen one day. It would be pretty interesting indeed, although I would not hold my breath. I think it's a bigger miracle that I'm at least a voter. Ryer goes on to say, you've talked a lot about bands running backing tracks, and even a lot of younger rock bands are doing it. It is strange to think it ruined Ashlee Simpson's career, but now it's accepted as normal in pop music. I think a lot of younger rock bands are running tracks because they are scared of YouTube and the internet. They don't want any bad publicity getting out. In the old days, an off night wasn't such a big deal, but today these bands can't afford an off night getting out on the internet for all to see. It all comes back to things being so competitive these days because no one wants to buy records. Just wanted to get some thoughts out. Very, 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 very interesting point there, Ryer. I think you could be onto something. I've told this story before. I once watched a singer in a major rock band opt to not take the stage and sing because he was having his voice was hoarse, and he turned to me and he said, you know what? If it wasn't for everybody recording it and putting it on the internet, I would almost give it a go. So that is a consideration. But I also don't think that it's such a big consideration with why so many bands are using backing tracks, recorded tracks. I think that there is a competitive aspect to it, but I think that these records and the way they are being produced is so big and so loud that they feel they need to also find a way to recreate that live. And in some instances, with so many vocal tracks in the studio and so many effects being laid into the studio because of technology, bands feel pressure to recreate that live, and there's only one way you're going to do it, and that's by putting a computer and playing to it when you play live. I think it sucks. I think it's wrong. I hate it. I hate that it happens in rock music, but it is so prominent, and it's got to stop. And it has been a soapbox issue of mine for a while. So, I get it to a degree, and I get why they're doing it, and I think Ryer is 100% onto something about it being a competitive thing and making sure you sound perfect every night, but that's not what rock and roll is all about. And when you see a real live band playing real live rock and roll, there is no substitute for that. Plugged in, warts and all, bashing it out, little off mic, little indifferences, jamming a little bit. That's what it's really all about. These guys putting up these computers and going playing to a track, it is ridiculous to me, and it's rampant, and it's got to stop. But I do think Ryer's onto something. There is that competitive aspect to it too. Everybody wants to sound better, louder, and more perfect than the next guy. And the sad truth is, the fans, by and large, don't know or don't care what's going on. They walk out saying how great they thought the band sounded without ever knowing half of what they heard the band wasn't even playing. Paul's second point was, what was the one band in the rock, hard rock, metal genre that you felt would make it bigger than they did, and one band that made it and you didn't get how they were successful? Thanks. Enjoy all your work. Keep rocking. Well, thank you, Paul. Boy, let's see. One band that I thought would be huge that never got there is a band from New York City called Degeneration, who put out a record a couple years ago. They got back together and did a record a couple years ago, but they got a lot of infighting with those guys, and they just can't stay on the right path. But when they put out their debut, which was in the early 90s, I thought that they were the next Guns N' Roses. And they have a record called No Lunch and a record called Through the Darkness that I absolutely love. So I thought Degeneration was going to be huge. They had huge touring opportunities. It just didn't happen. Band that got huge that I never thought would get huge, I don't know. That's a tough one. It amazes me at the amount of shows and attention. They've not really gotten huge. Well, they've gotten huge in England, but not so. But in America, they're still basically a House of Blues level band. But it always amazed me how popular Steel Panther got from what they started out as, which was a band called Metal School, and they still are, a parody, a spoof on 80s rock. I think there's a segment of their fan base that actually isn't even in on the joke, that are younger. But what really amazed me is how huge they got in England, where they can play an arena, which is incredible. So a parody sort of band like that, it amazed me that they've gotten as successful as they have. It probably, if you ask them, amazed them too. So that would be one that comes to mind with that. And as far as one that I thought would be huge and should have been, I love D-Gen, and I still wish that they would get a shot at breaking through. Like I said, they made a record, but not a lot happened with it, unfortunately. This is Kyle, who's in Philadelphia. Kyle writes, I'll keep it short and sweet. Why doesn't anyone from the current lineup of Judas Priest do interviews with you anymore? Well, Kyle, I have had some dialogue with the Priest camp about potentially coming on and discussing everything that's going on with Priest in the very near future. I'm hoping to have an interview with them very, very soon. You are correct. There was not an interview done for the Firepower record, but I have been in touch with Rob Halford directly, and we've known each other for a very, very long time. I think that sometimes there's certain sensitivities that flare up about things. I think there's sometimes things people say on this show and call in on this show that somehow get spun and interpreted a certain way. But I think that much of that air is clear, and I think we will hopefully be hearing something from a member of Priest very soon. As a matter of fact, I'm scheduled to host a show with Judas Priest in South Florida in March. So I'm not aware of any real issue. I don't know of Priest actually having done many interviews lately. And I also don't know, and nobody knows, what's going on with Priest and the other guitar slot. Because this has come up a number of times in the last few days, which we're trying to get to the bottom of. Priest have a bunch more touring coming. Andy Sneap has said he does not want to continue to tour. Will he do this run of touring, or will they have to find a full-time replacement for Glenn Tipton? So there are questions that need to be answered for Priest, and I hope that I'll be able to ask some of those questions soon, and we'll be able to talk to Rob or anybody from the band, who, of course, are always welcome. Thank you for your email. This is Paul, who's in Reading, PA, a lot of Pennsylvania representing today. Paul writes, Eddie, I listen every day, but due to my job, I'm unable to call, so wanted to drop you an email. Well, that's exactly why I do the mailbag segment. So thank you, Paul. I recently only got a Sirius account, so I apologize if you already answered my questions. No worries. We get new people on board all the time. Welcome to Sirius XM. His questions are, number one, I love that metal show. Any chance that format comes back on TV on a different network? I appreciate you asking about that metal show, Paul. I'm asked about it all the time. I have addressed it many, many, many times, but I have no problem doing it because I'm grateful that people care. It was my baby. I miss it as much as the audience does. But the show has been shopped by the person who owns the rights to it extensively over the last years. Since it has not been on the air, he has not been able to find a taker. If that should change, myself, Don, and Jim are all on board and all in immediately. You need to find a home for it. The obvious suspects are always thrown out to us by fans. What about Netflix? What about Hulu? What about this? What about that? They have to want it, get it, and know it. And we have not had luck. It is not my property. I do not own it. But the person that does has tried. If an opportunity should present itself anywhere out there, we will all do it tomorrow. I'll be honest with you. It is pretty amazing to me, with the amazing amount of streaming services and all these platforms that are looking for content, that nobody recognized the value of a show with a built-in audience like that metal show. But I also am not under any illusions. I know that show was on a perfect network for it in VH1 Classic, which no longer exists. And I also know that it was very niche-oriented, meaning if you were a hard rock fan, you lived and died by it. But if you were outside of the rock world, you didn't even know about it or care about it. Hell, you probably didn't even know what VH1 Classic was. So that's the challenge, We're outside of the hardcore rock bubble now and trying to go to networks to explain to them the value of a rock talk show. It's very difficult. But it is also surprising to me when you consider how much is out there in terms of these streaming outlets, throwing money around on all these different projects that somebody wouldn't take a spin at it. A lot of people have asked me about Access TV, which I am doing a show now for called Trunk Fest. I've positioned it to them. I've offered them to it. I've talked to them about it. So far, not interested. The price point doesn't work for them to make it work because it's a studio show with 3 hosts. It's a little different. There's also a possibility that we could do it in a different way, and I'm up for that as well. But the opportunity has to be there for the outlet. Not just going to throw it on YouTube and try to find a way to charge people to watch or whatever. It's got to be at least what it was. And right now, we have not found a fit or an outlet. But hey, if somebody knocks on my door tomorrow wanting to do that metal show or a version of, I'm all in.